There is no such thing as simply American. Four peoples crossed the Atlantic and built four different countries inside one border. Puritan, Cavalier, Quaker, Borderer. They came from four different corners of Britain. They landed in four different places and they wanted four different things. They did not arrive as one people and they never became one. And here is the part that should unsettle you. Your surname remembers which one you came from. So does the county your family stayed in longest. So does the way you say the word you when you are talking to more than one person. They stopped shooting at each other a long time ago. They never stopped competing. That competition is still running, and you are in it. And you were entered into it 400 years ago without being asked. Start with the ones you think you know. In 1630, 11 ships crossed from England to Massachusetts Bay under John Winthrop. Over the next decade, roughly 20,000 people followed. Then almost overnight, it stopped. They came from East Anglia, Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, the flat farming country of England's eastern bulge. And they did not come the way colonists usually came. They came in families. Whole congregations pulled up together and moved with their minister, grandparents, and children and all, which almost nobody else did in the 17th century. Here is what school never told you. They were not simply fleeing persecution. They were losing a culture war at home, and they left to build the society England refused to let them build. You can prove it by looking at when the migration ended. In 1640, the English Civil War broke out. The Puritan side started winning, and the ships stopped sailing. Why leave when you are about to win at home? What they built in New England looks familiar to you because it never went away. Towns arranged tightly around a common and a meeting house. Government by everyone standing in a room arguing until a decision was reached. In 1647, Massachusetts passed a law requiring any town of 50 households to hire a schoolmaster. They had founded Harvard in 1636, 6 years after stepping off the boat in a place that was still mostly forest. New England had, by some measures, the highest literacy rate in the entire English-speaking world. They also passed laws about what you could wear, what you could drink, who you could court, and how long you were permitted to sit idle. Fisher gave their idea of freedom a name: ordered liberty. Not the individual's right to do as he pleases, the community's right to restrain him for everyone's good. Sit with that for a second, not as history, as your street. Imagine your neighbors meeting on a Tuesday evening to vote on whether your jacket is too fine for a man of your income. That is not a metaphor. That is a thing that happened in English to people whose descendants are watching this. And they left fingerprints you use without noticing. The Boston accent drops its R's because East Anglia dropped its R's. That pronunciation crossed the ocean in 1630 and simply stayed. Open an old New England family Bible and you will find given names nobody uses now. Increase, mercy, thankful, comfort, submit, wrestling. And the town names are not American inventions at all. Boston, Ipswich, Braintree, Haverhill, Sudbury. Every one of them lifted off an East Anglian map and set down in the woods. Now go south and everything inverts. Beginning around 1642, under Governor William Berkeley, Virginia deliberately recruited a different kind of Englishman. Berkeley wanted younger sons of gentry, men with breeding and no inheritance, since English land went to the eldest son and left the rest with a name and nothing else. They came from the south and southwest of England: Somerset, Dorset, Wiltshire, Gloucestershire. But here is the second thing school never told you. Those gentlemen were a thin layer on top. The overwhelming majority of people who came to Virginia in that period came as indentured servants. Single young men who sold 4 to 7 years of their lives for the passage, and a great many of whom died before those years were up. That was not an accident of the market. That was the design. The Cavaliers did not want a society of equals and never pretended to. They built counties instead of towns because there was no need for a town center when the tobacco ships sailed up the rivers to each plantation's own dock. They built a world of ranks where a man knew precisely who stood above him and who stood below, and where insult was answered personally rather than legally. The beginning of a Southern honor culture that would still be producing duels 2 centuries later. Fisher called their freedom hegemonic liberty. Liberty as a possession, held in wildly different quantities by different men, and, this is the uncomfortable part, a liberty whose value depends on other people having less of it. Being free meant being free compared to someone. Their fingerprints are on the map too. Linguists trace the Virginia drawl back to the speech of southwestern England. The counties are named for English aristocracy: Fairfax, Culpeper, Northumberland, Spotsylvania. And the southern habit of formal address, of sir and ma'am and titles used carefully, is not politeness invented in America. It is the muscle memory of a rank society that crossed an ocean and kept its manners. The third wave wanted nothing to do with either of them. In 1681, William Penn received his charter. In 1682, he founded Philadelphia. The people who filled the Delaware Valley over the next 40 years came mostly from the North Midlands: Yorkshire, Cheshire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire. And they were Quakers. Everything about them was a refusal. They refused to swear oaths because a man should tell the truth always, and not only when required. They refused to remove their hats to social superiors, which sounds trivial and was not. It got them beaten and jailed in England because it announced in public that they did not accept that the man in front of them outranked them. They refused to fight. Plain dress, plain speech, plain buildings. And they welcomed everybody: Germans, Welsh, Dutch, Scots, Swedes, Catholics, Jews. Pennsylvania was the first genuinely pluralist place in English America, not out of indifference, but out of doctrine. Fisher's name for it is reciprocal liberty, the belief that your freedom is worth nothing unless it is extended in exactly equal measure to people whose beliefs you find wrong, including your enemies. Something else the Quakers did quietly that the other three did not. Women preached in Quaker meetings and held real authority in them. It is not a coincidence that when American women began organizing for their own rights nearly 2 centuries later, a strikingly large share of the leadership, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, came out of Quaker households. Conquest is loud and it gets the documentaries. A community deciding that women may speak in the meeting house is quiet, and it changed more. Their fingerprints, Quaker families in Philadelphia, were still saying thee and thou in ordinary conversation well into the 20th century, long after the rest of the English-speaking world had dropped it, because they would not use the deferential you. And the Welsh names run all through southeastern Pennsylvania: Evans, Roberts, Griffith, Lloyd, Owen, with the Welsh tract place names still sitting on the map: Bryn Mawr, Haverford, Radnor, Marion. And then came the largest wave of all, and almost nobody knows it. To understand these people, you have to understand where they came from, because they brought it with them entirely intact. The Anglo-Scottish border was a war zone for roughly 300 years, from the late 1200s to 1603. Not a war with campaigns and treaties, a permanent condition. Armies marched through repeatedly. No government on either side could hold the ground, so the people there stopped relying on government at all. What grew instead was a society organized around the extended family. You were loyal to your surname. Cattle raiding was an economy. Feud was a legal system inherited from your father along with the grudge. Men built fortified stone towers to live in because ordinary houses were burned too often to bother with. These were the border reivers, and their world only ended when James VI of Scotland became James I of England in 1603 and pacified the border by hanging and deporting a great many of them. Many of the survivors were pushed into Ulster from 1609 onward, and then beginning around 1717, they came here, somewhere in the region of 250,000 people over the next 60 years, the largest of these 4 migrations by a wide margin, 10 times the size of the Puritan wave. They landed at Philadelphia, where the Quakers took one look at them and encouraged them to keep moving west. So they took the Great Wagon Road down the valley and into the backcountry, into the Appalachian spine. And there they rebuilt the border almost exactly as it had been. Scattered cabins in hollows, not villages around a common. Loyalty to kin above loyalty to law. Feuds that ran for generations. Whiskey, which they had distilled at home, and now distilled here, in which in 1794 they went to war with the federal government over, because a tax on it was exactly the kind of interference 300 years of borderland life had taught them to answer with a rifle. Fisher called it natural liberty. The right to be left entirely alone by any government, anywhere, permanently. If you have ever wondered why a strain of deep, reflexive, unshakable suspicion of federal authority runs through American life, you are looking at where it landed and what year it got here. And their fingerprints are the loudest of all four because they are in your mouth. Appalachian and Southern English preserves border speech that Britain itself gave up. Ewans comes straight from the Scots' yins. Y'all is more argued over. Some trace it to the Scots-Irish, others to influences the Scots-Irish met after arriving, and honest linguists will tell you it is not settled. But reckon, yonder, afeard, breeches, critter, and poke for a bag, as in a pig in a poke, are all border English, carried here, kept here, and abandoned back home. Even the landscape vocabulary is imported: gap, run, branch, cove, lick, bald. Those are border words for border country, reapplied to mountains 3,000 miles away. And then there are the surnames which came over unchanged and are still concentrated in the same hills: Armstrong, Graham, Elliott, Nixon, Bell, Johnston, Kerr, Hall, Scott, Beatty, Irvine, Little. Read that list again. The first man to walk on the moon carried a border reaver name. So did the president who was in the White House when he did it. Two of the most American moments of the 20th century were staffed by families whose ancestors were stealing each other's cattle in the rain outside Carlisle. Now, before the answer, something that has to be said plainly. These four are the British streams. They are not the whole story of who Americans are, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Close to 400,000 Africans were brought directly to mainland North America in chains, and something over 450,000 once you count those shipped by way of the Caribbean. They did not choose to come. They built an enormous share of the wealth of the South, and their descendants shaped American music, language, food, religion, and politics as profoundly as any group named in this video. Native nations were here first in every one of these four regions, and were displaced from all of them. And the waves that came later, German, Irish, Italian, Polish, Jewish, Chinese, Mexican, and dozens more, did not simply blend into an existing America. They remade it. Historians also argue about this framework itself. Critics say it draws the four cultures too neatly, understates how much variety existed inside each region, and gives British origins more explanatory weight than they can carry. That criticism is fair and worth knowing. But the foundation is still under the house. These four laid it, and everyone who came afterward had to build on top of what was already there. So, four peoples, Puritans, who came as families to build a godly commonwealth and gave America the town meeting, the public school, and the conviction that a community may tell you how to live. Cavaliers, who came to reproduce an English aristocracy on a river and gave America hierarchy, honor, and the plantation. Quakers, who came to be left alone with their conscience and gave America religious tolerance and the idea that liberty must be shared with people you cannot stand. Borderers, who came out of 300 years of lawlessness and gave America whiskey, ballads, feud, and a permanent distrust of anyone in an office. That is the history. Here is the question you actually came for. Which one is written into you? Start with your surname. If it is on the river list, Armstrong, Graham, Elliott, Nixon, Bell, Johnston, Kerr, Hall, Scott, Beatty, Irvine, Little. The border is in you, and it is not distant. If it is Welsh and your family has been in southeastern Pennsylvania a long time, Evans, Roberts, Griffith, Lloyd, you are likely looking at the Quaker settlement. Plain old English occupational names anchored in New England for generations, point Puritan. English gentry names repeating across Tidewater, Virginia, the same first names cycling through every generation, point Cavalier. Then look at where your family stayed longest, because these four regions still exist. New England and upstate New York, Tidewater, Virginia, and the coastal Carolinas, the Delaware Valley and southeastern Pennsylvania, or the Appalachian Spine running from western Pennsylvania down through West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and into the Ozarks. Then listen to your own family talk. Does it say y'all, Ewans, you guys? Or does it refuse to say anything at all and just use you like a stranger? Do the R's disappear off the ends of words? And then the sharpest test, the one you cannot game. 4 sentences. Do not think about which one is correct. Notice which one you agreed with before you finish reading it. The community has the right to restrain the individual for the good of all. Some people are simply born to lead, and others are not. Freedom is worthless unless your enemy has exactly as much of it as you do. No government on earth has any business telling me anything. You already picked. That is the point. So here is the answer. If your family has been in New England for as long as anyone can remember, if there is a school teacher or a minister in every generation, if there is an unexamined family belief that people ought to be improved and that the town has some say in how they live, you are Puritan and you are still arguing for ordered liberty, whether or not you have ever heard the phrase. If your roots are in Tidewater, Virginia, or the coastal South, if your family cares about lineage and manners in the correct form of address, if there is a quiet assumption that some people are meant to lead and that rank is natural rather than earned, you are Cavalier, and a man who wanted an English estate on a Virginia river put that assumption into your bloodline in the 1650s. If your people are Delaware Valley, if the instinct in your family is toward plainness and away from display, if you were raised believing that the people you most disagree with must have exactly the rights you do, you are Quaker, and you are carrying the strangest and most demanding idea any of these 4 brought over. And if your name is on the River list, if your family came down the wagon road into the mountains, if you say y'all or yuns without thinking, if there is a bone-deep certainty in you that the government is not your friend and never was, you are borderer. Your ancestors spent 300 years in a war zone learning that nobody was coming to help them. And they were right, and they never unlearned it. None of these 4 ever left. They stopped fighting with muskets and started fighting through school boards, state houses, courtrooms, pulpits, and ballot boxes. They are fighting right now on television, in language you use every day without ever once wondering where it came from. Because the argument over what freedom actually means is not a modern political problem. It is a 400-year-old family argument between 4 peoples who crossed an ocean, could not agree on the answer, built 4 separate countries inside one border, and never resolved a single thing. They just handed it to you.